I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, who will lead a panel on making magazines make money again. President of James G. Elliott Company, Jim Elliott.
Well, thank you very much. Samir, I think we're going to sit down on these chairs, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You already have met John French, and John is going to be part of this panel. John is he's a rock star in B2B, and we are so privileged, I think, to have him. He shared a lot of really neat things. Dan Fuchs, he's the vice president and started at the beginning of HGTV magazine, which is really an interesting cooperative with a television show. And I think at the same time, his background included Oprah before that. He also was involved in Lifetime magazine. And you'll note a theme there, and that theme is that he's always worked with other media. He hasn't fought them, he's worked with them, which I think is really pretty neat. Steve Mayer is the publisher of Plate magazine, which is a beautiful B2B magazine. He came out of the large company world where he was publisher of restaurants and institutions. This panel is going to be more tactical, really. We're going to get into some very specific issues, programmatic, native advertising, a bunch of stuff like that. So with that said, why don't we all sit down?
I think I'm good, right? Thank you.
It's good to have magazines on the coffee table.
Good place for them.
Well, I wanted to mention, it's hard to follow you, John, and Sappy, and you, Reed. I remember something you said to me a long time ago. I've known you a long time. You said, always run your business like you're going to sell it, even if you're not. And I think that's a really fantastic piece of advice. The first thing we're going to talk about, and we're going to cover a whole bunch of subjects, so we're going to move fairly quickly. What I do for a living, so you get context out of this, I run ad sales for a number of American magazines, both in B2B and in consumer. We have titles in both. And this ads and ideas thing you see is a consulting arm of that. And I bring that up because that leads me to my first question. And that is, how do you guys perceive the difference between B2B and consumer magazines? Not so much in audience, but really in operational perspective, I think. Dan, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. So sort of thinking about that, and you know, HGTV magazine, and I've been at Hearst for now almost 14 years and worked exclusively on joint ventures. And you know, we're obviously always looking within these brands to how do we monetize them. And having had a unique advantage with HGTV magazine, pre-existing brand, joint venture TV network, a chance to start from the beginning in 2011. How would we staff a magazine? Where would we really focus our energies? And has that developed over time? I think, you know, B2B and direct-to-consumer, you've got obviously the contingency of your readership and the consumer at the center of the hub and the focus there. Are we adding value to that consumer? That's our most important contingency. I do think it is unique versus B2B in that we have an extremely broad advertising base. And in a way, we talk to anybody who wants to talk to essentially the human being that is within the HGTV ecosystem. So even though if you're a paint company, you might want to talk to us. If you're in the furniture business, you might want to talk to us. But you might want to talk to us if you're in the beauty business. We don't write about beauty, but we have that consumer. We don't write about automobiles, but we have that consumer. And so are we staffed like a B2B? I mean, we are pretty lean and pretty efficient, and we can talk more about that, which is that we have as many people working in marketing and creative services as we do in sales, which is very unique versus magazines 15, 20 years ago. But also looking more at that ad base across the board and the chance to cast the widest possible net.
Yeah, I think I agree with Dan. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was my background comes exclusively out of B2B. And I think about all the magazines that when I was running companies, B2B magazines tend to be much smaller, you're right, much more focused. And the ad base tends to be a lot more narrow. So they tend to be more numerous. And if you look at all the companies I've been involved with, and I just get the kind of a mental note sitting there, the number of magazines titles that I've either managed indirectly or directly is in the hundreds. So what that meant was in anywhere between 25 and 30 industries. And the good thing about that is I can go into a cocktail party and I can talk for about 3 minutes intelligently about any industry in the world. But beyond the 3 minutes, then I'm dead. And so what that means, in answer to your question, I think that's where the differences are between a consumer, even an enthusiast, versus B2B. But I think the worlds are starting to come together. I really do. And I mentioned earlier that one of our clients, and by the way, I should have mentioned what we do. We help companies turn around. We mentor CEOs, work with boards, work advisor to M&A, and just are the feet on the ground, helping people with experience to get through whatever they're getting through. And one of our clients is Omeda Data Systems. They manage data, and they would be called a fulfillment house. And one of the things we're helping them to do is to get out of category. So they actually manage probably 75% of the files in the B2B industry, so they're dominating the B2B industry. But what they need to get into, frankly, is into HGTV. They need to get into help those type of people make more money on their customers. And I think you guys do a hell of a job, and I'm not just saying because you're sitting here, but between the TV program and between the magazine and the branding, you're doing a lot of surround. However, I've talked to some pretty big publishers, and I won't tell you who their names are, but you would know them. You would know these titles. And when I go beyond, what do you know about that subscriber besides they paid you money and you deliver a magazine to them? What do you know? I get a blank stare. And that's usually, where B2B has made its money is that we go deep down. Now, it's easier because it's controlled, but we go deep down into who that person is, what they buy, what their habits are, and all that. We go very deep. So I think the world is starting to come together, and I think it's a good thing. I mean, it's not a negative or a positive. I just think B2B and consumer, and at least that aspect of the business, is starting to look a lot more alike.
Yeah. My experience is I agree with you. The one difference is that sellers, going down a little bit to a tactical level, I think sellers in B2B tend to be more frightened of ad agencies, whereas in consumer they tend to be more, they're forced to be more conducive with that. I'm going to move now, and I'll start, Steve, by asking you. There's a lot of new technology coming out, things like virtual reality, other digital opportunities. What, in your judgment, are you interested in, and do you think will emerge in a stronger way?
Well, we are definitely in a B2B world with Plate Magazine, and unlike John, I've, in my case, devoted my whole life not to hundreds of magazines, but to 2 magazines in the same field, the restaurant industry. And one of the things I think that does separate B2B from consumer, and John alluded to this, is not only how much we know about our audience, the data that we have, but also how deeply invested we are in that industry. And I think some of the success that I've enjoyed, that we've enjoyed with Plate Magazine, is we're really a player in the restaurant industry. We're not just here to make money or to develop a product to sell in the future. and we view ourselves as invested and engaged in that way. As to technology, I mean, we're not immune to all of the forces of our society, that the world's going digital. We actually launched Plate Magazine 15 years ago in 2002 as a magazine, and for that reason, as well as others, people thought we had rocks in our heads. There were 30 or 40 magazines serving the restaurant industry. Nobody needed another. And those that were there were already struggling, not only with the rise of the internet, but just the decline in ad revenues generally, the need to diversify. And here we were entering the fray with a new publication. It's frankly taken us a while with the nature of our publication to diversify successfully into the internet. I think I mentioned this in the interview I did with Samir. We definitely, in our field, believe in the power of touch and the power of sight and the beauty of the printed product. We think of our audience as being restaurant chefs, as being somewhat sensual and tactile. They're touching and dealing with food and taste and smell and sounds of the kitchen and the crunch of a food all the time. And so a magazine, a print magazine, really has a natural connection with them. And how do you replicate that experience online has been a challenge for us. And frankly, it's only been within the last year that we think we've gotten a handle on it by literally not just redesigning, but reinventing our website from the ground up. But I do think that digital is part of the way that even chefs, we were kind of a laggard industry. We weren't the most technologically advanced, but everybody is on their smartphones. Everybody has the power of a computer in their fingertips, and it's just something we have to get our heads around.
Do you see any new technologies coming up?
I was just going to say, I think
Yeah.
it's ideally that you think about your audience. And so sometimes, particularly on the agency level, a media planner might say, what are you guys doing for augmented reality? What are you doing with VR? And I'm saying, I don't work at Pop Mechanics. That's not our audience right now. We're a lot about paint and pillows. And I think there are some cool stuff that can be done, and some of our advertisers we're working with are doing that in their own way, mostly on the trade level. But in terms of investing that money, which might seem simply a gimmick, there's great profitability in print ad revenue and print ad paging. And if we find a way that, I think will lead us there to make that kind of profitability and margin, we'll be interested in investing in that. But B, I think we have to really feel that our consumer wants that. When we've done cool stuff with paint advertisers, we've gone to the tactile. We've done print units that use different varnishes so you could see gloss and that you could see what eggshell really looks like. We've done impact units where things open up. So right now, the surprise and delight, there's a lot to be had in the magazine itself. So we're always watching that technology and to John's point, getting instructed and educated on that. But I think we have to see a clear path that A, we can make money off that, and B, that's something our consumer really wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing I'd add too is, and this is magazine focused, and what I was talking about earlier was not so much specifically a magazine, but one of the things I left out in that turnaround, by the way, in the year 2 of the turnaround, anyone heard of a guy named J.C. Suarez? He was a designer. And J.C. unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, was a really dear friend, but he was one of the leading designers of magazines in New York. He did Shape magazine. He did Martha Stewart for a number of years. I mean, this guy was like top notch. And I couldn't afford to pay him, but he did it because he was a friend of ours. He redesigned all our magazines in year 2 of that turnaround. And the reason I say that is that the magazines still were important. And I keep talking about data and files and all that stuff. We also found out that we knew, and we continue to reconfirm that the number one source of new names coming in, or not new names, but number one source of names in the file and the way to keep them is still sending them a good quality magazine. So,
Product first.
A product. It's the product first, and so it's still a magazine. On the other hand, I also, unfortunately, I make a living up, and I can't resist helping other people with their businesses. But when you were talking about the crunch of the food and the handling of the food and the noise in the kitchen and all the activity, I thought that I'm not kidding. The way you explain that was very visual and auditory to me, that imagine doing a VR, virtual reality, for the readers so they can walk into the kitchen at a famous restaurant at crunch time at dinner and actually look around the kitchen and people hollering at each other and stuff like that. So I'm sorry, but I just couldn't resist that one.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. You had brought up, I'm going to jump around just a little bit here, since you were talking about data and how, and on a more tactical level, right? You talked more strategically about the use of data, but from a tactical level, how do you make money on data, and how do you monitor who's handling your data and some of those issues?
We basically had to figure out a way to turn our audience development files into a profit center. Because I said earlier, because the hand that we were dealt, we couldn't do many other things. And what we did, Jim, basically was we built an integrated platform so all the names could be used anywhere in the company. And by the way, having run a company with a lot of different magazines, a lot of different publishers, one of the other phrases that would get you a quick response is that when I say to a publisher, well, we're going to put your names in the unified database so we can build products, universally. And the publisher would say, well, no, you're not taking my names. Well, they're not your names. They're the files, they're the magazine that you produce. The company owns those names. And the reason I say that is to answer your question directly, how do you make money? I'll give you a great example. We had a couple of different divisions, and I could go into Cygnus because that was the most recent, but it was in Penton, although better at Cygnus because the technology got better. We had a division in construction, heavy construction, and one of the big ad categories there is trucks and skid steers, believe it or not. For all the exciting stuff you guys do, I'm actually talking to people who are producing skid steers, the things that go in and pick up and go like that. And those people also tended to buy trucks. So we had to find new names. And it's expensive to go out and find them. So we were getting them online, we were launching white papers, we were doing all this stuff. Once we got the unified database, we did a search and we queried people in research and said, do you buy trucks? Now the other side of the company was in municipal management and city and town management and fire trucks and police cars. That was our public safety division. And what we found was there was a whole bucket full of people who bought trucks that we didn't know. And if we didn't have that unified database, and if we couldn't ask them that question, we would never know that they were influencers. So what we did was we got them together as a group, we packaged it, we did some social media influencing, which I can go into another time, but basically we sold it, and the profit margin was like 90%, and we sold it at a lot of money. So that's one look at how you can make money off your data.
Even at our small company, we have 3 titles that are related in a sense. I was talking to somebody last night. We have Plate for the restaurant industry, we have a hotels magazine, and we have a meat processing magazine. And this idea of having a unified audience database does open up opportunities. And as one of the publishers, I'm not just resistant to it, I'm one of the first to take advantage of it, because hotels has people that are executive chefs and F&B managers of the hotel property. At this hotel, there's a food and beverage director. Likewise, the meat magazine, although it's mostly about meat processing, has the quality control principal at McDonald's, who's making sure all the hamburger patties have no E. coli in them. He's a guy that reads the meat magazine. He could be interested in Plate magazine too, and what he does new on his hamburgers. So we've taken advantage of that for audience development, but we've also, not only do we have deeper information than a consumer magazine generally has, these people not only being controlled circulation write a check to us, they tell us a lot about their businesses, but we've really, without overburdening the respondent and reducing response rates, we found it's possible to add 1 or 2 questions sometimes that really have a purpose in mind. And our purpose sometimes my purpose is really twofold, either to enrich the story you can tell about your audience. Like I can now tell people that at any given time, 30% of our people are looking at new sandwiches for their menu. And that's up from a few years ago when sandwiches weren't served for dinner at every fine dining restaurant, but now they are. But you can also create new products out of that, either tailored for an advertiser. I mean, you mentioned paint and pillows. Well, we've got sandwich people. We've got dessert people who have a very particular interest. Can we create a new product for them, or even for the readers who are heavily into the sandwich business? And that data can really open the door to creating niche products even within our niche.
It is really that balance, though, because we have very high opt-in rates in terms of email blasts, in terms of readers telling us more about themselves and expressing interest in advertiser products. And they do that because the trust factor is very high with this brand. So that's a huge benefit that we've got a lot of people who are weighing in and saying, I want all things HGTV. If you guys think it's cool, I want to know more about that. At the same time, you want to be careful with that list. So in terms of monetization of that list, we've looked at, everybody wants to buy the list, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the most effective or most profitable thing for us. So right now, we've been using it very effectively to leverage more print advertising. And right now, it's in developmental areas. So in the past 12 months, we've been doing deals in the fashion space. So non-endemic, we don't write about women's apparel in the magazine, but we have that consumer. So we're now working with Chico's, we're working with J. Jill, we're working with Land's End. We segment that audience based on the advertiser, and it's a combination of a demographic and geography. And we'll do a separate printed piece with a separate offer. And it's not the most efficient ad buy for this advertiser. The CPM is very, very high. But we're on rounds 2 and 3 with some of these advertisers because it is working. And we feel that's the win-win-win all around. This special reader, she gets a great offer that's sent exclusively to her. It's good revenue for us, and we're growing that business now, entering a new category. And for the advertiser, who's been running the same fashion magazines over and over and over, gets a chance to see a whole new audience without, and this is the most important part, sort of betraying that trust that the consumer sort of endowed us with in the beginning.
Because they have that interest, and they trust the brand. I mean, this is getting back to obviously at basics, but whether it be in B2B or in a professional way, B2B, but also in your field as well, it's still trusting the brand. And what we found out is that when we gather information about readers, we've done some very loose research, not scientific research, but we talk to people and we say, why do you give us the information? Because we're in a world now that nobody wants to give up personal information, even professionally, is because I like the brand. I trust you guys. I trust HGTV. I watch it every day. And I think that's a great advantage.
Yeah, you got to be careful with it.
You have to, yes, you have to be careful with it.
Yes. To change the subject, but to stay within the print area here, some of the larger clients out there, including my own, the American Chemical Society, has actually created a group of people to work on native advertising. So they have their own editorial staff, they have their own group on that. And then our sellers at the Elliott Company then go out and sell, and we've actually done quite well on that. Do you care to speak about that? Who would like to start? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it's native advertising, custom content advertising, editorial collaborations are now almost 25% of our ad business, which is significant because the truth is you cannot run an effective business filling out RFPs and hoping for 3-page schedules. That's not 2017. And advertisers might be really good at manufacturing crackers or a car or a paintbrush, but they may not be so great at content, and that is what we are great at. We don't have a separate studio yet, really within Hearst overall, but that responsibility falls upon maybe the marketing department within an individual magazine. However, what I really see shifting is, particularly within roles of jobs like a managing editor, those jobs are changing a lot. Those people are now in a position where they are serving as a liaison with a marketing department to an advertiser. And editors are now developing relationships with advertisers, which they always have, in the sense of, well, we write about furniture, so I'd love to hear more about your products. Now it's more about, well, let's work together, maybe on some collaboration that we think is a benefit to our reader. it is really always going back to that. I can tell you if I'm speaking with our editor-in-chief about a cool native advertising for an endemic type of advertiser, there's probably greater receptivity. I think our readers are really going to sort of enjoy that too. But it is not a gimmick, the native advertising approach. If done effectively and with the consumer in mind, it's a tremendous revenue potential.
Totally agree.
I agree, it's a revenue potential. We do it through the marketing department as well. I was with a previous publication, Restaurants and Institutions, where we did a significant amount creating literally magazines separate from our own for advertisers. And we didn't compromise the existing editorial staff or put demands upon them that were unreasonable. But we created a magazine, in some respects, just as good as our core magazine. It takes a special kind of client relationship to do that, I found. I mean, not only internally has it got to be measured, and you've got to protect the integrity of your own brand and not betray the trust of your readers. There has to be a real purpose to this, and it, beyond finding people with deep pockets who want to be leaders, who have big ideas, they really have to have a story to tell. Sometimes where we also can add value is showing them where that story lies, that they themselves don't recognize. They're so wrapped up in making their better paint or making their better tortillas, whatever the case might be, that they don't see the larger story there, that they're capable of telling and being a leader in the industry, even in a small way in that industry.
Yeah, I think, by the way, I agree, and I think helping them tell that story, you're right, they don't think in those terms. But in terms of what I've seen with our clients is great success, but not always great success. And Jim, when it comes down to, and what I've seen it fall down mainly, two things. One is at the sales point. It takes really smart salespeople to explain that and to delineate what is an advertising page and what is native. And native, in my mind, by the way, is just it's what used to be known as sponsored, it's all advertorial and things like that, but it's all the same, but much more highly developed. So that's number one. The second thing is I also wondered why it's taken off like the way it has. And I think my theory is, by the way, and it's backed up by no research at all, but no, I tell you, just a gut feel, is that what's happened on the web, especially with the younger generation of millennials and stuff, is that this is information flow, and everyone with the old joke, and somebody used it yesterday, well, it must be true because I read it on the web, it was on the internet, it must be true. It's an old joke, and the reason it's old now is because there's a lot of stuff out there that is crap. So back when we were doing advertorials, a lot of times people wouldn't take them seriously because it had to be labeled as advertorial. And if you were a reader, you take that. I've seen people do it in magazines. They take it out of the magazine, throw it in the basket, and or the recycle bin, and then read the magazine. I think the why they're more successful now is the reader has become the traffic cop and said, send me everything. I'll decide what's real or not. I'll decide what's useful or not. And I think that's a healthy thing, and that's why I think the future of native advertising is great. Because when you do those things, it's clearly, labeled that you're doing it for Sherwin-Williams or whatever the example would be. But the consumer has gotten so smart and wants to be their own control of information, they'll say, I'll decide what's good information and what's not.
Well, and also, and I feel like we're doing this a lot at Hearst, is that advertising integration is prolific in television. Native advertising is all throughout the web, and should not print. We're held to a higher standard. There is something about the permanence of it. It also depends too. We are not in the news business. We are essentially in the entertainment business. And there actually is some good evidence. We work a lot with Starch Studies, which is the online survey, which tracks a lot about, did you read the specific page? Most of the time, the custom content that we execute for an advertiser performs higher than the regular run-of-book ad they will send to us. Because it is real content. We are advising on that content, and it all goes back to that trust factor, which is, well, if it's in those pages, they must think it's something that I would be interested in, and that's a huge value that we can add to an advertiser.
Gentlemen, do you think the industry has the potential to abuse the privilege, the trust that we are empowering
Yes.
native advertising?
Sure.
Yep.
Absolutely. I've seen plenty of examples that I think are way overboard, almost signs of desperation, of failing magazines, and they'll do anything for whatever the check is worth.
Well said.
And you touched on something too, what we all did. Number one, it takes a very sophisticated sales
Really
job.
does, 'cause-
It is almost more a marketing function than a sales function, because your average sales guy doesn't always, guy or gal doesn't always think in that way. Number two, in some respects, it is old wine in new bottles. We've been doing this forever. We called it different names. Digital gives us new ways to do it. Number three, there's one of the conflicts that we've run into are with the advertising agencies, who are likewise, their business model is being challenged from many directions. And now a lot of the agencies are thinking they can get into the content creation business too for their clients. There's a wonderful presentation you can look at online. It comes from the UK called Content versus Crap. I mean, the proliferation of content and the notion that, hey, you know, user-generated content, it's anywhere. I can create content. What really differentiates valuable, useful content from
No, Mark
crap?
Pritchard at P&G last year addressed and said, you know, we have to avoid this crap trap, which is simply generating all this content for the sake of just pure reach, and then we're losing all of this brand equity that we've been spending all these years to build up.
And also getting back to the question, is it a danger? I think the danger begins at the point of sale. I think if the salesperson goes in and they present it as, call it what you will, but you know, we'll do anything we want, just give us a check. That's the beginning of a bad road to go down, and that's quite different than going in and saying, hey, we have an idea that we can help you reshape the message you want to get to an audience, and it's going to be native, it's going to be paid for, but it starts with, that's why I say it takes a very sophisticated salesperson, because a lazy salesperson is going to say, send us all you want, we'll write it, we'll make a special thing for you, and you can pay us, and I get a higher commission. That's a much different level than that understanding of reshaping someone's marketing message. And I would agree with you. I think it's I do get concerned about that.
I think I have an observation. We just did a massive sale, almost $1 million on a single advertiser in one of these. I think the issue isn't necessarily, it isn't lazy, it's skill set. In understanding that takes communication, which means listening, which so many salespeople don't know how to do. So when you
listening.
Just kidding.
I got it. But
I lost my microphone. Maybe that's a metaphor.
I think when you do, what we've done in this particular brand is we've taken a look at the people that have better skills. When you take a look at the ability, by the way, this went through an ad agency. And that meant that you really had to listen to the agency, you had to play the client, you had to play the editors, because the editors have such rigid positions. And it was really, really somebody that was very versatile in listening, not in selling, but in listening and trying to put the deal together. I think this is a big audacious area for print going forward.
And by the way, and the final part of that is, and I have done it, not a lot, but I have done it where an editor has come to me and said, I can't do that. And if you really are true to your principles, you say, okay.
And you will sort of set up the expectations very much in advance. And we're able to do that now, but it has been on a couple years of learning and some mistakes as to setting the expectations. Because, to John's point, the more I got involved in the digital space and knew what was going on there are companies like BuzzFeed and Refinery29, which, disclosure, Hearst has investments in, where they will sell native advertising concepts, but it's very clear to that advertiser, this is what you get to see, this is what you get to do, and this is what you don't get to. And the reason why you're buying native is that you want it to feel that way. So we've adopted those standards, and I think the salesperson is so afraid that he or she is not going to get the deal by saying, we'll figure it out, or don't worry.
Yep.
We will say, and a real quality advertiser, oftentimes it is done at the client, perhaps versus agency level, is You want a native experience, so tell us more about your product. We'll work with you on that. But you won't get to see this. You don't get to have that final approval, and they trust that we're going to execute to the best of our standards.
Agreed.
We have, I'm not quite sure how long we have, Samir, another, how long? Okay. In that case, I'm going to move forward just a little bit and skip a couple of the questions. I won't. I'm going to go back to one and then I'll come back. You were talking about just going into digital a little bit. Is programmatic a race to the top or a race to the bottom, or different races?
We don't see much activity on the programmatic front, and when we do, when someone comes to us and wants to buy our eyeballs, so to speak, it's at an unbelievably low cost per thousand. And it's stuff that really looks wrong when it runs in the magazine. I mean, we're a magazine all for chefs and all about food, and when an ad runs for, I mean, toothpicks would be better than some of this stuff. It's like your new tires. Why is that in Plate Magazine or even associated with our brand? And so I'm glad it hasn't come to us and we haven't had to go chasing it.
Did you have something?
No.
About 3 years ago, Samir and I were guests at Reed's. He has a conference, and it's a conference about buying and selling things, but it's not just for magazines, it's for various media. And I remember, and I'll always remember going into that conference, and we were sitting together, and the magazine people got up, and they were talking about, let's capitalize on magazines, but digital is our future. And about an hour later, the television people got up, and this was second screen people. And I'll never forget this presentation as long as I live, and then Samir wrote about it, that the second screen people embraced television. They didn't put it down. As a former media director, that's my background too. We didn't put media down. We tried to figure out how to use it and make it work together. And with that said, I want to ask Dan. Dan, your career has been about this. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about this a little bit?
I can, and I work in a magazine now that has TV in the title of it, so we certainly do embrace that. But HGTV Magazine is really a proof point, not so much about the success of HGTV, the brand, although that's a huge advantage we have, but it is about the success of print. It is a proof point that people want certain types of content in ink and paper. And if you look at some of the magazines I've worked at, or some of the others at Hearst, the Oprah magazine is a hugely successful print business. And Oprah is a super successful brand. But if you read that magazine, Oprah's on the cover. There's not that much about her in the magazine. Food Network. If you watch a lot of Food Network, there's a lot of competition. There's Iron Chef and there's Chopped. But the magazine is more technique. It's more about recipes, HGTV. And John's very excited to hear that Tarek and Christina are going to renew for a third season. He was concerned about the relationship. But
I was concerned.
If you see a lot of HGTV, it is about real estate. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of buying and selling and flipping houses. The magazine is more about design and decor and DIY. So you should, I think, when you look at it from a branding perspective, we embrace the idea that there's other media out there and that print serves a very specific role within there. I think that this is certainly, I would almost argue, a more challenging time for the television industry than the print industry right now. As a platform, not necessarily in terms of content. There's great content on television, but as we've been hearing all morning about, the medium influences the message. And I think that we have a $50 million plus business with this magazine, which is driven by a brand, but it's really more driven about the execution within that brand. So if you look at all the products that Hearst has launched within the last 10, 15 years, Dr. Oz, Oprah, Food Network, HGTV, we have a new magazine coming out in 2 weeks with Airbnb. So if you think about what Mr. Dijon was talking about earlier about all these catalog companies or all these digital businesses putting out catalogs now. Airbnb, which does not have storefronts and is a digital business, is looking for a printed manifestation of that.
Isn't that amazing?
And if we embrace the fact that there are great brands that might be rooted in television or might be rooted in the internet, we'll have opportunities to partner and to make money together across those.
Yeah, one, I guess, final observation about print and TV specifically, and it just occurred to me because I heard this a couple weeks ago. In the winter, we're blessed enough to live in Key West, Florida. If anyone has been down to Key West, it's a crazy place. Let me know if you're going to be there. And or I'm in the Miami airport, either one. But we have a house down there on the golf course, and they're really close together because it's a golf course community. And our next door neighbors are from New York, and they live full-time in New York, come down with their children, and they have a couple of kids. One's, I think she's 8, and the boy is 10. The reason I tell you that is because he was doing some work in the yard, and he was with the 8-year-old. And I'm doing some work, and I can hear them. And I'm not eavesdropping, but it was just obvious. I mean, they were standing right next to the fence. And he tends to be a New Yorker, a little sarcastic, which I love. And his daughter comes over, and she's kind of bored. And she says, and I overheard the conversation, it was exactly like this. He said, Tanya, what are you going to do this afternoon? And she said, oh, I don't know. I'm going to go inside and watch TV. And he said to her, do you think if you read a book it would hurt you? And she's like, no, well, maybe I'll read a book. And that's what we were talking about earlier. She was open to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you know, and to me it's ironic that I think previous speakers were talking about when there was radio, and radio was going to be eclipsed by, you know, by TV, and it was going to go away, and then the internet was going to blow away, the TV and everything came before it. And some of the most successful brands of the last 10 years are a combination of a magazine and TV. So what does that mean? It's, you know, so I think it's a good thing.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to do the typical Samir thing, which is what keeps you up at night. But before I do that, Steve, when I just met you on the phone a week ago, and we were talking about different assets that a media company might have. And you made a very crystal clear point that you can have other assets, but they better be just as good as each other, that there has to be quality, and they have to serve a purpose. And I want to just address that question to you, or let you elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I think what I was talking about, and I believe this very deeply, is your brand has to stand for something. I think that, you know, this is a golden age of media, but it's not really mass market media. It's much more fragmented than ever before. We saw yesterday how the highest rated show gets 8% of the audience. Well, you know, it used to be 50% of America was tuned into the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday night. That doesn't exist anywhere anymore. And so if you have a brand, or you're thinking about creating a brand, whether it's magazine or TV or website, whatever it is, there needs to be a purpose, and from that flow a lot of executional details. I saw this, we invited in a consultant, something we rarely do. I mean, publishers are the worst at this. We tell everyone else what they should do to market themselves. We never ask, we never hire, we never advertise, we never spend money.
They don't market.
We don't market ourselves. We're like, you know, we're terrible. We're hypocrites. I got my company to invite in a consultant, somebody we knew for a long time. And he shared with us, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. There's a old TED Talk, but it's still relevant, by Simon Sinek, and it's called Start With Why. And you really have to be able to answer that question, why? Why do you exist? What is your purpose? What gets you up in the morning or keeps you up at night? In our case, you know, we articulated that as we take food further. And the beauty of it is it wasn't like a brand new invention. It really did articulate what we already did. The beauty of it was that everybody bought into it, editors and salespeople. And moreover, it was not just what we did, it was what our audience did, what our advertisers do. We all are in this together. We take food further. And so if you stay true to your purpose, I mean, whether it's a brand extension or whatever, that becomes kind of a filter through which you judge all kinds of potential new ventures. There are a lot of things you can do. A lot of advertisers you could go after but do they take food further? If they don't, spend your energies elsewhere.
Dan, what keeps you up at night?
I've been sleeping okay.
You have?
You know,
Yeah.
lately. Although the 13 and 16-year-old daughters are challenging that. But so doing a lot of traveling, and the majority of our business, our ad business, is outside of New York. And the ad sales team that I am fortunate to work with always jokes about, where's the Dan Fuchs Optimism Tour coming next? And the Optimism Tour is, making its way in 2 weeks to Cleveland and Detroit with an editor-in-chief. And so I'm optimistic about the magazine, but I'm optimistic about the business. And optimism is infectious. And as ad salespeople, when we go into a client and they're all concerned about what's going on with their business, what they're going to do, and they can see somebody who's excited about opportunities, that works. What keeps me up at night is getting everyone on our team that level of optimism that I share. From the ad sales assistant to the marketing coordinator who's writing proposals. And I think very much about what John said about is I've always sort of governed my career as leading by example. And the best bosses I've had are the ones who would never ask me to do anything that he or she would not do. So I'm always sort of thinking, and it could be late at night, although I'm the first person to go to bed in my apartment, is how do I get that level of optimism and excitement across the entire organization? It's hard to do.
John?
The quick answer is, having had a corporate job for 30 plus years, my job now is to be an advisor. And I get these phone calls. I still get them because we advise and mentor CEOs and boards and all that stuff in companies in transition, and which transition is another word for stress. And and they call at 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, and they'll explain the problem, and they need a little advice. And the reason I sleep very well at night and explain it to my wife, the big difference is when I hang up the phone, I'm done. That problem is out of my mind. I'm not the operator anymore. So that's been an advantage. But what I do, or what I mentioned in my talk as well, my biggest concern is a constant need to be at the very forefront of technology advancement. And if I worry about anything, is that I'm slipping.
I sleep well too. But one of the things that concerns, as Dan said, it's being optimistic. I try to instill in my team almost I call it a righteous indignation. Like we are to feel so firmly in what we believe that when somebody says no to us, we know better than they do. You belong in here. You need to be in here. And I think it's hard to give salespeople in particular. I mean, it's not only saying no, it's fighting back, and fighting back from a position of a feeling of rightness of your cause. The thing that does concern me about technology is this tendency of everyone to get all enamored of the shiny new object. And sometimes, the fundamentals, just because print magazines have been around a while, it's not sexy anymore. It doesn't excite people. And we, encounter every day people that want to try somebody new, or they think that, the world has moved on. And in a lot of ways it hasn't. And, we seem like the Luddites, reminding them of these fundamentals, but some things do not change, and these shiny objects have come and gone. And
What keeps me up, or what I get a lot of concern over, is clients that have good ideas, and they may or may not fit the particular audiences you talked about, but they don't have the capacity to do it. So it's one thing to have great ideas, but it's another thing to just pick a couple of them and know for sure that you actually can execute on them. And with that said, I think our time is up, right, Samir? So I thank you all very much, and I thank my panelists. You're all fabulous, and thank you.